When the storm of power shakes the skies and secrets unfold like shadows in the night, the world leans in to listen. India returns the J-35 fighter jet. And in this single act, nations are reminded that truth cannot be buried forever, nor can sovereignty be leased to another's hand. There comes a moment in the life of every nation when silence can no longer be its shelter, and borrowed voices can no longer be its defense. A time arrives when the truth must be spoken not in whispers but in thunder, and in that sound the world is reminded that sovereignty is not a gift granted by others, but a birthright carried in the soul of a people. When India chose to return the J-35 fighter jet, it was not merely an act of aviation politics, not merely the movement of machinery from one place to another. It was a declaration, a living statement that no nation's pride can be piloted by another's hand. To outsiders it may appear as if this was a diplomatic transaction, a correction of contracts or agreements gone astray. But beneath that surface lies the beating heart of dignity, roaring louder than engines ever could. A fighter jet represents power. Yes, but it also represents trust, control, and the invisible weight of dependency. For years, nations have signed their names under papers crafted elsewhere, agreeing to terms written in languages of compromise and quiet surrender. But there comes a point when one must look in the mirror and ask, whose sky are we truly flying in? Whose command dictates the path of our wings? That question is not just about aircraft, it is about the essence of independence. For true independence is not declared once on a stage, but reaffirmed through choices that guard the future from silent erosion. India's return of the jet was such a choice, a message clear as daylight that sovereignty is not negotiable, and that dignity must not be managed like property. Strength does not always appear as the tightening of fists, or the raising of weapons. Sometimes strength is revealed in the calm of refusal, the simple but powerful act of saying no. In that moment, India's voice was not raised in aggression, but in clarity. To return what was once held is to proclaim that one's destiny cannot be dictated by another's blueprint. It is to step away from shadows cast by giants and to stand in one's own. Nations across the globe took notice, for they saw that even in the complexities of modern power, it is still possible to choose self-respect over convenience, sovereignty over submission. The thunder of this choice will not be heard only in corridors of governments. It will echo in the spirit of people, for when leaders act with courage, the citizens beneath them walk taller. When a country defends its independence, every child born into its land inherits not just soil but pride. The fighter jet may have carried engines of great power, but its return carried something greater, a reminder that the soul of a nation cannot be outsourced, borrowed, or controlled by another's remote hand. And so the act becomes more than political maneuvering. It becomes a beacon, lighting the way for those who have grown weary of dependency, tired of secret strings pulled by distant powers. India has shown that dignity cannot be piloted by another's control. The thunder that rolls from this act is not the sound of war, but the affirmation of peace built on self-respect. It is a reminder to the world that true sovereignty is not about standing against others, but about standing for oneself, unafraid, unbent, and unbroken. Control is a quiet force, one that rarely announces itself openly but slips in through agreements, alliances, and arrangements dressed in the language of cooperation. It hides behind signatures, behind promises of partnership, behind the notion of shared interest. Yet its true purpose is often to bind, to tether, to limit the freedom of the one it claims to support. For years, America's secret influence over defense arrangements has stood like a tall wall, invisible to the ordinary eye but undeniable in its presence. Control can feel like safety to those who submit to it, because it offers structure and order, but it is a cage wrapped in velvet. What India chose to do when returning the J-35 fighter jet was not only to reject an aircraft, but to reject the very idea that another power's hand should rest so heavily on its decisions. Unseen but ever present. There is something profound in this act, for it speaks to the nature of freedom itself. True freedom does not exist when it is dependent on someone else's permission. Freedom is diminished when decisions are influenced by shadows instead of light, when sovereignty is compromised for the sake of appearances or convenience. By carving a doorway through that wall of hidden control, India has reminded the world that sovereignty requires not only bold speeches and public ceremonies, but courageous choices made quietly yet firmly in the face of pressure. A nation does not prove its independence by how loudly it proclaims it, but by the choices it makes when those proclamations are tested. Influence works in subtle ways. It convinces leaders that dependence is efficiency, that compromise is partnership, that submission is wisdom. It presents control as collaboration, masking it in friendship, cloaking it in shared strategy. But beneath that disguise there is always the reality that one voice grows louder while the other grows softer. India chose not to let its voice fade. By returning the fighter jet, it pulled back the curtain on this hidden script and rewrote its own. The world has seen many nations allow themselves to be written into someone else's story. But here was one willing to insist that it would write its own chapters in its own ink. The strength of this choice is not simply about defense. It is about spirit. For what use is the sharpest weapon if the hand that holds it is not your own? What value is there in technology if it comes bound with strings too tight to allow genuine movement? To break those strings is to reclaim more than an aircraft. It is to reclaim destiny, and destiny cannot be dictated by a foreign power, however mighty its influence may seem. This act has said clearly that the will of a people once awakened cannot be contained by secret hands or invisible agreement. The beauty of sovereignty lies in its ability to stand without apology. India's decision is a living reminder that dignity cannot be shared, leased, or borrowed. It must be held firmly, even if it means breaking with comfort and standing against pressure. This is the lesson carried in the return of that jet. That no matter how strong the wall of control may appear, the door to freedom can always be carved by those with the courage to wield the chisel. And once carved, that door becomes a pathway not just for one nation, but for all others who dream of walking unbound into the open air of true independence. A fighter jet is more than a machine of speed, steel, and firepower. To many it may appear as nothing more than an advanced tool of war, a marvel of engineering meant to dominate skies. But in truth, such a creation is layered with meaning, carrying within it not only the roar of engines, but also the weight of pride, the symbol of sovereignty and the reflection of who holds the power to decide its use. When India chose to return the J-35 fighter jet, it was not just returning metal to its maker. It was returning a symbol that had become stained with the shadow of control. In that moment the nation made clear that no weapon, however advanced, can be worth the cost of invisible change. Symbols hold power far beyond their physical form. A flag is but cloth, yet it commands loyalty. A crown is but metal, yet it demands allegiance. In the same way, a fighter jet is but machinery, yet it proclaims who is master of the skies. To accept such a machine under the strings of another is to accept that your skies are not entirely your own. It is to agree that your sovereignty is conditional, dependent, fragile. By returning the jet, India refused to let that symbol be twisted. It reclaimed the power of the skies, declaring that if it must fly, it will fly with wings unbound, not wings that answer to commands whispered from elsewhere. There is dignity in ownership, and there is dignity in choice. When that dignity is compromised, even the greatest of machines becomes a burden rather than a blessing. The world has seen how nations entangled in another's control lose their ability to act with true independence, forced to weigh every decision against the will of an unseen overseer. Such nations may have powerful weapons, but they lack the freedom to wield them without hesitation. India's act of return becomes a message to them all. Better to stand with fewer tools in your own hands than to hold many while being guided by someone else's invisible grip. In the halls of power, decisions like these ripple far beyond borders. This act was not about rejecting technology or rejecting progress. It was about rejecting dependence. It was about affirming that a nation's pride cannot be bought with engines and wings. A jet may dominate the skies for a time, but the spirit of sovereignty must dominate forever. And that spirit cannot breathe freely when overshadowed by the demands of another. To return the fighter jet was to place pride above possession. independence above influence, and freedom above firepower. This choice also carries a lesson that resonates beyond nations into the hearts of people. For just as countries must choose to stand free, so too must individuals. Each of us encounters symbols, titles, possessions, positions that may seem to grant us power, but if those things are held under the control of another, their power is hollow, their weight unbearable. True pride is not in what we hold, but in knowing that we hold it freely without compromise. India's decision reminds us all that it is not the possession of symbols that defines us, but the courage to return them when they threaten to enslave us. So the J-35 fighter jet, once seen as a tool of strength, has become something greater in its absence, a statement. Its return declares to the world that sovereignty cannot be piloted by another's hand, that symbols lose their shine when stained by control, and that dignity is the most powerful weapon of all. Through this act, India showed that it is not machines that make a nation powerful, but the unwavering will to stand free and unbound. Strength has long been measured by the size of armies, the sharpness of weapons, and the reach of missiles. Nations have competed to showcase the might of their machines, believing that the one with the largest arsenal is the one most secure. Yet history has shown time and again that weapons without independence are empty, that firepower without freedom is fragile, and that control borrowed from another's hand is nothing more than an illusion of strength. When India chose to return the J-35 fighter jet, it was an act that whispered a deeper truth. Real power does not lie in the possession of advanced weapons, but in the courage to walk away from control disguised as partnership. This decision was not about rejecting technology, but about affirming that the heart of sovereignty is not metal and machinery, but resolve and self-respect. Machines of war can frighten, they can intimidate, but they cannot guarantee independence. What guarantees independence is the spirit of a nation that refuses to bend. By stepping away from a tool that came with hidden strings, India demonstrated that strength is not in what one borrows, but in what one dares to build for oneself. The J-35 may have been advanced, it may have represented the cutting edge of foreign design, but its presence carried with it the silent weight of influence. To remove it was to remove the shadow it cast, to make clear that the nation's skies will not be shared with the whisper of another's control. True peace cannot be born under the watchful eye of another's invisible hand. It can only be nurtured in the soil of independence. There is courage in the choice to walk away from what others call power. It is not easy to refuse something that appears to elevate status, to enhance security, to promise prestige. Yet in that refusal lies the greater strength, the strength to define one's own future without compromise. By cutting ties with dependence, India sent a message that sovereignty is worth more than borrowed strength. The courage to say no to control is more valuable than the ability to say yes to every offer. In that act, the nation affirmed that its pride is not for sale, its skies are not for lease, and its future is not for bargaining. This is not about weapons. It is about will. The jet may have been a marvel of technology, but without true ownership of its use, it would have remained a symbol of constraint. To reject it was to lift the veil and to declare that genuine strength is measured not by how much one possesses, but by how much one refuses to surrender. Weapons may defend borders, but it is dignity that defends sovereignty. And dignity cannot be manufactured in foreign factories. It must be cultivated in the choices of leaders who value independence above convenience. The act of returning the fighter jet therefore stands as a lesson to the world. Strength is not about holding tightly to everything offered, but about releasing what comes at the cost of freedom. A nation's worth is not proven by the shine of its weapons, but by the clarity of its decisions. The skies above are vast and open, and only those who choose independence can truly claim them. India's refusal to be bound teaches that real power lies not in the thunder of machines, but in the quiet yet unshakable courage of a nation that dares to stand on its own terms. Across the sweep of history, moments arise that carry the weight of more than one nation's decision. They become echoes that move across oceans and whisper to lands far away, teaching lessons not through force but through example. When India returned the J-35 fighter jet, it was not a choice confined to its own borders. It was a universal message spoken in the language of courage. It declared to the world that no secret hand can hold forever what was born to be free. And in doing so, it reminded not only governments but also peoples everywhere that freedom once reclaimed resonates far beyond the land where it was won. Every step toward sovereignty is a step walked on behalf of many. The chains of control are never crafted for one alone. They are designed to bind whoever accepts them, whoever bows before their weight. By casting aside those chains, India reminded others that such bonds are not permanent, that they can be broken, that dignity can be restored. For every nation that feels the pressure of hidden agreements, for every people who sense that their choices are shaped by hands beyond their sight, this act stands as a testament that liberation is possible. And liberation does not require grand battles, but steady courage. The courage to choose pride over dependence and truth over comfort. The echo of this act will be felt, not in the roar of jets, but in the rising confidence of nations that see themselves reflected in it. A small act, a single rejection, can carry with it the power of inspiration. For sovereignty is not just the right to govern, but the will to govern without compromise. When one nation takes a step toward reclaiming that will, it shows others that they too are capable. India's decision speaks not just for itself, but for those who have remained silent too long, those who have believed that control by others was the only path forward. Freedom is never fully secure until it is guarded by constant vigilance. Even the strongest nations must reaffirm their independence, for influence often arrives quietly, offering safety, promising progress, yet seeking control. To act against such influence requires vision, the willingness to see beyond what is offered to what is truly at stake. That is what India demonstrated, that the true threat is not the absence of advanced machines, but the erosion of choice, the surrender of decision, the weakening of self-rule. In refusing to accept that fate, India defended not only its present but its future, protecting generations to come from the invisible weight of external control. And so, this act becomes more than politics, more than defense strategy. It becomes a torch, passed not by hand, but by example, lighting a path that others may follow. For sovereignty is not unique to one nation. It is the shared dream of all who wish to live unshackled. When India declared that no secret hand could forever command its skies, it declared also that no secret hand should forever command any people anywhere. In that declaration lies a truth as vast as the horizon. The spirit of freedom was never meant to be bound, and the courage of one nation can awaken the courage of many.